Oh, I imagine this. A major country facing, well, an enormous problem, a demographic crisis so bad it's actually threatening its economic stability. We're talking about Russia here, and the latest warning, a potential labor shortage of, get this, 11 million people by 2030. It makes you wonder, how does a country even start to tackle something on that scale? That's really the core question for our deep dive today. We're drawing heavily from an article called Barack Face. Russia needs a guest worker program and the world should pay attention. So our mission today is to really get into Russia's severe demographic issues. We'll explore this, frankly, pretty audacious proposed solution mentioned in the source, a huge guest worker program. And then we'll think about what that might mean, not just for Russia itself, but maybe for the rest of us too. It's complex, but we'll unpack it. All right, so to really get a handle on this, let's start with the immediate crisis. Russia's own labor minister warning President Putin directly. Nearly 11 million workers short by 2030. And the source material doesn't mince words. It calls this an existential threat to Russia's long-term economic viability. That's pretty stark.
It really is. And, the causes are deep-seated. Of course, you've got plummeting birth rates. That's been a long-term trend. But the war in Ukraine has just thrown gasoline on the fire.
Yeah.
You've got the direct losses, injuries, deaths on the battlefield impacting the working-age population.
Right.
And then there's this huge brain drain. Lots of younger, educated professionals, they're leaving.
Mm-hmm.
All of this feeds into wider economic instability. I mean, Russia's economy minister, Reshetnikov, actually warned the country was on the brink of recession. It's a perfect storm, really.
And Putin's response, as the article notes, has been these calls for large families, framing it as ethnic survival, pushing women to have 8 kids even. But the article argues pretty strongly that these kinds of pronatalist policies, on their own, they just aren't enough. Why is that? Yeah. What's the fundamental reason they fall short here?
Yeah, it comes down to this concept called demographic momentum. It's pretty straightforward, actually. Fewer people in the reproductive age group today inevitably means fewer babies born tomorrow, even if each woman has more children.
Mm-hmm.
So even if, let's say, hypothetically, birth rates magically shot up right now, it would take decades for that to translate into a larger workforce.
Mm-hmm.
Decades.
Right, the lag time.
Exactly. It's just far too slow to fix the immediate urgent crisis they're facing in the next, 5 to 10 years.
Hmm.
Pronatalism is a long game, not a short-term fix.
Okay, so if encouraging more births isn't the quick fix, that brings us to the main solution proposed in the source material, this large-scale guest worker program. What does that actually look like, according to their model?
Well, the model they point to is primarily the Gulf countries. Think UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar.
Okay.
The basic idea is workers come in, they contribute to the economy, construction, services, whatever's needed. They earn money, gain experience, and then, crucially, they return home. The key phrase from the source is, without offering citizenship. That's central to this specific model.
Right, temporary labor.
Precisely. And Russia's position is interesting here. The article calls it a second world economy, meaning it has resources, industry, but isn't quite at the level of, say, Western Europe or the U.S. This apparently makes it attractive to workers from poorer nations in Central Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, maybe parts of Africa too.
So, practically speaking, what jobs are we talking about? If you bring in millions of people, where do they go? What sectors need them most urgently?
The article gets specific. Construction's a big one, agriculture too. Then you have caregiving for the elderly, for children, manufacturing, logistics, the backbone stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it also mentions the potential for higher skilled roles, like tech and healthcare, surprisingly.
Interesting.
The overall goal is clear. Keep factories and farms running, take some pressure off Russia's own aging workforce. Plus, these workers spend money, they need housing, food, so they generate demand. And importantly, they contribute to the tax base, Social Security funds. It's meant to be an economic engine.
Okay, this is where, for me, it gets really interesting. The source suggests this isn't just about solving Russia's problem. It could be a model for the United States and beyond. What's the logic there? That seems like a big leap.
It does, but the argument connects it to the gridlock in the U.S. immigration debate.
Yeah.
It often feels stuck between two poles, mass deportations on one side, mass amnesty or pathways to citizenship on the other.
Right, very polarized.
So this article positions a well-structured guest worker program as a potential third way. It allows countries to bring in needed labor, fill those critical jobs we just talked about, but it tries to sidestep the contentious issue of citizenship, which is often the main political sticking point. It's framing it as a pragmatic solution to labor needs.
A pragmatic, maybe less politically charged way to handle labor shortages.
That seems to be the idea presented. And it doesn't stop with the U.S. The source suggests that if Russia could pull this off effectively, it might offer a blueprint for Japan, which is facing its own severe demographic crunch, and maybe even China eventually as its population ages.
Wow, so potentially quite influential.
Yeah, and there's another angle, potentially stabilizing neighboring regions by providing employment opportunities, which could also act as a buffer against uncontrolled or illegal migration flows.
There was another really fascinating idea in there, how this could potentially replace brain drain with brain circulation. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. So we mentioned earlier that young, educated Russians are leaving. That's the brain drain.
Right.
The brain circulation idea is that Russia could actively recruit skilled professionals from other countries. The source mentions places like India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt as examples. These wouldn't necessarily be people looking to emigrate permanently. They might be happy to come for a few years, earn good money, get valuable experience in their field, and then perhaps return home or move elsewhere.
So temporary but high skilled.
Exactly. Think tech workers who could work remotely or on-site for a period, engineers, nurses, maybe even teachers. The key, the article stresses, would be a modern, digital, well-regulated system to manage this flow.
And the source also touches on soft power. How does a guest worker program translate into influence?
Well, the argument is that instead of projecting power through, military or purely extractive economic means, Russia could build influence differently. By becoming a source of economic opportunity, it could foster goodwill and build networks, particularly in those source countries in Asia and Africa.
Mm.
The article uses this analogy. Imagine Russia becoming to Tajik and Uzbek workers what the U.S. is to Latin Americans, a land of opportunity, even if it's temporary opportunity. It suggests this could be a more sustainable way for Russia to rebuild relationships and its global standing.
Okay, but this all sounds quite optimistic. Surely there are major hurdles. The article must mention challenges, right? No plan like this is straightforward.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It lays out some very significant obstacles. First off, the potential for xenophobia and nationalism within Russia.
Yeah.
That's a powerful force that could easily be weaponized against foreign workers.
Huge risk.
Definitely. Then there's the critical need to proactively address human rights concerns. We've seen abuses in guest worker programs elsewhere, so ensuring fair treatment, proper conditions, preventing exploitation that would be paramount and difficult,
And probably requires strong oversight.
which leads to the next point. The risks of corruption and inefficiency. Getting visas, managing labor contracts, these systems are often vulnerable. It would require massive effort to keep things clean and functional. The source really hammers this point. For any of this to work, the Kremlin would have to prioritize pragmatism over ideology. And, well, that's not always been their track record, is it?
That's putting it mildly. Prioritizing pragmatism over deeply ingrained ideology or nationalism, that feels like the biggest if in all of this. So wrapping this up, what's the bottom line for Russia and maybe for us watching these global demographic shifts?
The article's conclusion is pretty stark. It says the alternative path for Russia without something like this is far worse. Think a continuously shrinking economy, an increasingly burdened welfare state trying to support an aging population, persistent inflation, and just declining relevance on the world stage. So the argument is that Russia really needs to pivot to move beyond just focusing on boosting birth rates or wartime footing and towards creating this robust, humane, and economically sound guest worker program.
And bringing it back to that global perspective, the piece argues that in this era where so many countries face aging populations and demographic decline, the future might belong to nations that figure out how to embrace labor mobility with dignity and design. It really leaves you with a final thought, framed almost as a challenge. Let Russia lead not just in population policy panic, but in pioneering a labor system the world can learn from. Which prompts the question for all of us, really. What does it actually take for any nation to put pragmatic economic survival ahead of nationalism or ideology when facing such fundamental demographic change? Something to definitely keep thinking about.